Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Really been looking forward to talking about this chapter with you. The Heroine's Journey, Writing, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer by Jennifer Marmo. And I was looking forward to this because I'm personally a huge fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I've seen all the shows and even watched the Angel spinoff. And I just really liked it. I was sad when it was over. And I hope that one day they'll reboot the series. But anyway, I'm aware that I might be a little biased as a Buffy fan towards this. So I'm hoping that some of you aren't familiar with the show, or maybe even don't like it and could offer some sort of critical balance to this. But I'll try my best to be critical of this chapter like I've been with the other ones. Okay, so the question I've had for all of these chapters, right, is, why this artifact? What's special about Buffy? Could you do the same sort of thing with Xena the Warrior Princess? Could you do the same sort of thing with Wonder Woman, for that matter, which comes up in this reading? And I think this author would say no, and she definitely says no to the Wonder Woman idea. But I want to delve a little more deeply into this. This first point here, I think you could make a compelling case for any of those other ones. She says much of the curriculum is male-based. It's difficult for young women to connect with the characters and ideals. So as we'll get into later here, we're talking about heroes in literature and the sort of heroic ideals, basically what it means to be a good person, right? And I think these are very good morals to be teaching kids or even college students, right? We want people to be heroic, not craven or willing to just stand idly by as injustice happens, right? And I think she's probably right about this. I'll wondering what you think. I was trying to think a while ago about my high school literature class and the sort of heroic tales. I mean, obviously we read Odysseus, a couple of war stories. It seemed like there was one about a dog, but I don't remember any about with a woman hero. So I don't know. Let me just pause here briefly. What about your experiences of? Do you remember back to literature class in high school, or maybe even college? Did you read any heroic tales, and if so, were they all male heroes only, or did you have some with the female heroes? Okay, so assuming that we agreed that that's a problem, and I think most of us would, Buffy would seem to be the perfect choice here, right? And I think this is the key to this. This is point number 2 here, because Buffy is a modern teenager that students can, quote, relate to as she deals with typical teen issues like dating and dealing with parents. So really a lot more what I would say is like Peter Parker more than Clark Kent, if you're up on your comics, right? So I thought this was a good point to make. There's a lot of these superheroes that are basically just gods and all but named, right? It's kind of hard to relate to them as a human being more than just some kind of abstract superhero. So I think that's a good point. Sort of an empowered figure with sort of the same powers that you have. I don't know. It is kind of, for me, this is why I like Spider-Man as a young boy and older, right? Because Peter Parker wasn't some kind of super cool, suave dude. It's kind of nerdy, kind of like the people like me reading the series, right? So, if Buffy can do that same sort of thing, but I would say, Buffy doesn't strike me as being particularly nerdy or anything like that. I seem to recall her being quite popular, at least at times. But anyway, it's my memory might be failing on me here. So what do you think about point number 2? And then we get to point number 3 here, which I think is probably the strongest point that Marmo makes, is this sort of historical importance of Buffy. She says Buffy changed the ideal of women as pawns, needing to be saved, a princess rescue thing, damsel in distress. I mean, God, how many times have we seen that stupid trope? And has the power to continue that change, which that last piece I think is kind of where I would say the whole premise hinges, right? I don't know if what a typical 15, 16-year-old or 18, 19-year-old college freshman, if you showed them this episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, would it still hold up to them, or would they think, "Wow, this is kind of this is 1997. It's kind of old and dated looking now. Aren't there more modern examples?" So, I keep thinking of Xena as well. But anyway, what do you think about point number 3? Is there something historically important about Buffy and her role, and I guess in a feminist tradition, I suppose, that makes it worthy of study? Okay, I guess I'm asking you lots of questions in this one, which is good. Okay, so how do we use Buffy the Vampire Slayer? And it sounds like she's part of a program. It sounds like a lot of this was in place before she came up with the idea of using Buffy. I know a lot of you are probably familiar with this Joseph Campbell book. I loved it back in high school. Hero with 1,000 Faces. And that's got all this stuff about the monomyth. And I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with this already. But just in case you're not, there's lots of good documentaries about this. I'm trying to think of the person's name. Let me pause this real quick and figure that out. Bill Moyers is his name. I had to look that up. But you can find Bill Moyers documentaries about Joseph Campbell, and those are great. The book's also very readable, just fascinating stuff, really. If you haven't read The Hero with 1,000 Faces, I would recommend it just for pleasure reading, if nothing else. But anyway, that seems to be part of the curriculum there. And in that book, he presents this idea of, you got all this cultural diversity, but if you look at the hero myths and all these different cultures, they tend to follow a pattern, with variations, but there's basically this hero's journey and really diverse stories. You could go to all these different countries and there's something similar. It's just really fascinating stuff. But Marmo says it's inadequate just to look at Campbell because it's been a while since I read this, but I'm pretty sure she's right about this. It doesn't really. She says it doesn't mention females at all, female heroes. Again, it's been a while since I read it, so I'm pretty sure she's right about that. But anyway, she thinks it's necessary to bring in some feminist revisions or some critiques of it, and she's got one by someone named Frankel, who has a definition of she wrote an article in response, I suppose, to Campbell, where she talks about a heroine as a somewhat dynamic, valiant, and thoroughly feminine, which I think that last point is key. I guess you could argue that Xena is not really that feminine compared to Buffy, who seems to be able to hold on to that femininity better than Xena, let's say. But I haven't really thought much about that aspect of it. But anyway, that's a way you could bring this in. And then that Campbell piece, I guess, will lead to some of these larger insights that she hopes the students will help with. Then we have this lovely quotation from an article by Cochrane that she quotes from here. A fairly little paragraph, and I love the paragraph. It's awesome. She says, "Understanding Buffy will help us understand how myths explain where we come from, how we act in and upon the world, and shapes who we will become." So there, I really see how the Buffy series would work well there, because the whole idea is that Buffy's the chosen one, and there's all this sort of mythos that Buffy learns about. Same time, if when you start to watch the show, you don't know about it either, right? But as you watch the show, you learn what who these Watchers are, and who the Slayers are, and all this sort of mythology that goes with the show. And then you can really see how it determines a lot about Buffy's life. And then the second point, that power resides in language and the very words we use to create our realities. So that's an interesting point too from Buffy. Is there anything? I guess the Watcher. Thinking about Giles's character, I know there were a couple episodes that were very concerned with language. Kind of blanking on that right now. But even just Buffy the Vampire Slayer, you can think about how calling somebody a Slayer versus calling somebody a princess, might determine to some extent your very reality. But and the third one, we are always already story embodied. We are myths made flesh. So they don't really go into it here. I think about Carl Jung, who Campbell gets a lot of his stuff from, and his idea of he also talks about archetypes. And the way I teach to this when I talk about it in my classes is if you think about Freud and his psychoanalysis of dreams, his book Interpretation of Dreams, which by the way, Interpretation of Dreams is another one of those books that's just completely awesome, highly recommended. Change your life, basically. If you read that book, then from here for the rest of your life, every time you have a dream, you'll be psychoanalyzing it. But the idea is, let's say you have a dream and there's a whale in your dream, and the whale is chasing you, something along those lines. So when you go to the psychoanalyst to analyze this dream, they'll think about, well, basically a dream is your subconscious trying to communicate to you, right? And it communicates. Dreams are the images are kind of like a language. So let's think about what this whale might mean to you. And what people misunderstand is with this interpretation of dreams is it's not like a universal dream dictionary. Like the whale is going to mean the same thing to everybody who dreams about a whale. In fact, it has a lot to do with that person's sort of recent experiences and memories, and then the further back. So maybe maybe they saw a documentary about a whale, or they saw a whale washed up on a shore, let's say, at some point recently, and then maybe once we understand sort of where that comes from, then you could think, well, why would you be thinking about that? And then maybe they also feel like in their life they've been sort of washed up on a shore, right? So then you can figure out what the real problem is, what's going on in their life. Maybe something happened at the job that made them feel this way. Okay, so that's kind of how it works on a dream-like level. And so what I would say somebody like Jung adds to the discussion is, instead of just talking about an individual's dreams, we can talk about sort of a culture's dreams, and those are manifested in these myths. So sort of a myth is to a culture what a dream is to an individual. So this is kind of the whole basis of my approach to pop culture. And I would definitely say that about Buffy. If we look at Buffy the Vampire Slayer, we can learn a lot about our culture by watching that show. And some of it would be intentionally put there by Whedon, but some of it might be completely subconscious or unconscious, just sort of like that dream phenomenon. Anyway, I'll stop here. What do you think of these points? Do you agree with Cochrane? All right, then we get to these classroom connections, and you can't fault this author for not having enough classroom applications for this. So substantial investment in class time, watching all these episodes, reading all these summaries even. So you wouldn't want to go through all this Buffy stuff and then just have one little assignment, right? I mean, if you're going to justify it, you need to have quite a few activities. And I think the way she structured this makes a lot of sense. I really like the way these build on each other. She talked about this. They start off with this definition of a hero, and I won't go through all these. You can read those in the book, of course. I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of them. I really like the fourth one here, this 3/4 book foldable. I like that one. I think it's a neat concept, but also maybe it's because I do so much work with digital and online stuff. It's just kind of cool to bring things back to a material level. Make people aware of writing as a material thing, and I think that assignment works well for that. And I thought the article jigsaw activity was kind of interesting as well. Not quite sure I fully understand it. Might have to go back and read that one again, but it sounded kind of interesting. But of course, what I thought was the greatest thing, and probably what Jacques Coutu and Ron Sierra would say were the greatest things, are this emphasis on cooperative learning. And I just I want to read this passage to you. I just love this. It was really powerful to me, this part at the end. So I'll just read this and give you my thoughts on it. So, through conferences with a teacher, Students will learn to look in their work for consistent errors, and they will learn how to fix those errors. Students will no longer be dependent on the teacher for assistance in each step of their learning. They will be like Buffy Summers at the end of season 7, when she is finally able to tell Rupert Giles, her watcher and father figure, that he has taught her all she needs to know. And so I thought this was just a beautiful way to conclude this piece. It comes back in such a wonderful way to Buffy and the artifact. But I mean, to me, this is kind of what Rancière and Jacques Coutu were all about, right? This reducing the dependency on the teacher. So if you watch, if you watch the show, you know that Rupert's not really like her master. It doesn't really work that way in the show. There's a lot of, she's kind of rebellious. And this is kind of the point of the training in it to some extent, right? So, I mean, the show kind of mirrors, I think, what Marmot wants for her students, but also, I think, what Rancière and Jacques Coutu want for students, this idea of an emancipated intellect, right? So anyway, I'll leave it there. I'd always like to hear your additional thoughts on the chapter, what you like, maybe what you didn't like. Did you find points to criticize in it? Anything like that, let me know. But I'll stop it here, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.